Some people build boats to escape floods. Maya built a house, Cedar Falls, Iowa, February 2024. The Cedar River had been rising for 3 days when they announced the evacuation. Maya heard it on the radio while she was doing homework at the kitchen table, the steady voice of the emergency broadcaster cutting through the static, listing street names and zones, explaining that residents had 24 hours to gather their belongings and leave. Her street was on the list. "Mom." Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. Quote, 1. Her mother was already at the window, watching the gray water that had crept across the backyard and was now lapping at the base of the old oak tree, the tree where Maya's tire swing used to hang, the tree where she had carved her initials next to her father's before he went away to a place he couldn't come back from. "I heard, baby." Her mother's voice was tired. 3 double shifts in a row at the diner, and now this. Quote, 3. Quote, 404. The question hung in the air like smoke. They both knew the answer before her mother said it. Quote, 5. Maya looked at the golden dog lying on his bed by the heating vent, his gray muzzle resting on his paws, his eyes watching her the way they always did, like she was the most important thing in the world. Biscuit was 11 years old. He had been her father's dog first, then hers, and for the past 3 years since her father died, he had been the only piece of her old life that still felt real. "I'm not leaving him. Maya, I'm not leaving him, Mom. I can't." Her mother closed her eyes. When she opened them, Maya saw something she rarely saw there. Not anger, not frustration, but defeat. The kind of defeat that comes from fighting too many battles with too few resources. "The water's going to be 6 feet deep by tomorrow night. Maybe more. If you stay here with that dog, you'll both drown. Then I'll figure something out." "Figure what out?" "You're 12 years old. You can't stop a flood." "I don't have to stop it." Maya was already moving toward the door, her mind racing through possibilities she hadn't fully formed yet. Quote, 32. The idea had been growing in the back of her mind for months, ever since she'd watched a documentary about flooding in Bangladesh and seen houses built on platforms that rose with the water instead of fighting against it. Floating houses, amphibious architecture, structures designed to survive floods by embracing them rather than resisting them. She had researched it obsessively, the way she researched everything that caught her interest. YouTube videos, engineering websites, survival forums where people discuss building rafts, and floating platforms from recycled materials. She had never built anything herself, but she understood the principles: buoyancy, displacement, the relationship between weight and water, and she knew where to find the materials. The tire dump behind Miller's auto shop had been accumulating for years. Old tires, bald tires, tires with sidewall damage that couldn't be retreaded or resold. Hundreds of them piled in a mountain of black rubber that everyone in Cedar Falls complained about, but nobody did anything to remove. Maya had passed it every day on her way to school, and every day she had thought, those could float. Tires were perfect flotation devices, sealed chambers of air wrapped in waterproof rubber, virtually indestructible, available for free to anyone willing to haul them away. Each standard car tire could support about 40 pounds of weight when fully inflated. A platform made of 50 tires could hold a ton. Enough for a small structure, some supplies, a girl, and her dog. She had 24 hours. She had better start moving. Mr. Miller was closing up the shop when Maya arrived, out of breath from running the half-mile from her house. "The tire's out back," she gasped. "Can I have some?" He looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Those old tires? What for?" "A raft, a floating platform. The flood's coming and I need—" She stopped, realizing how crazy she sounded. "I need to save my dog." Something shifted in Mr. Miller's expression. He had known her father. Everyone in Cedar Falls had known her father. The mechanic who could fix anything. The man who had dropped dead of a heart attack at 38 and left behind a wife and daughter who were still trying to figure out how to live without him. Quote 19, he said. Quote 20 to quote 21. She worked through the night. Mr. Miller lent her his pickup truck and his teenage son Marcus to drive it. They made 7 trips between the tire dump and Maya's backyard, hauling loads of tires that they stacked on the only high ground remaining, the concrete pad where her father's workshop used to stand before they sold the tools to pay for the funeral. Between trips, Maya planned. She sketched designs on notebook paper, calculated weights and buoyancy, figured out how many tires she needed for the platform and how many for the walls. The structure taking shape in her mind was simple but functional. A rectangular base of tires lashed together with rope, topped with wooden pallets for a floor, surrounded by walls made of stacked tires, filled with whatever insulation she could find. The walls were important. This wasn't just a raft. It was a shelter, a floating house that could keep her and Biscuit warm and dry for however long the flood lasted. The temperature was hovering around 20 degrees, and it would drop further overnight. Without walls, without insulation, they would survive the drowning only to die of hypothermia. By midnight, she had 63 tires arranged in a grid on the concrete pad, 9 across and 7 deep. She lashed them together with rope salvaged from her father's workshop. Good rope, marine grade, the kind he used to use for towing and tie-downs. She threaded it through the rims and around the treads, creating a web of connections that bound the tires into a single floating unit. The floor came next. Wooden pallets from behind the grocery store, laid across the tires and secured with more rope. She covered the pallets with a layer of plywood she found in the garage, creating a smooth surface that would be easier to walk on and would help distribute weight evenly across the platform. Then the walls. She stacked tires 3 high around the perimeter of the platform, leaving a gap on one side for a doorway. The stacked tires she filled with snow. Packed hard, it would act as insulation, trapping air in the spaces between crystals and slowing heat transfer from inside to outside. Between the tires, she stuffed straw from the bales her neighbor had been using for winter garden mulch. Straw was one of the best natural insulators. She had learned that from her research. And it was free for the taking from Mr. Henderson's yard. The roof was the hardest part. She didn't have time to build a proper frame, so she improvised. A skeleton of wooden boards spanning the tire walls, covered with a tarp she found in the garage, weighted down with more snow and secured with rope at the corners. It wasn't beautiful, but it would keep rain and snow off their heads. She added a chimney hole near one edge, a small opening with a raised collar of bent metal that would let smoke from the camping stove escape without letting rain in. Ventilation was critical. She had read about people dying from carbon monoxide buildup in enclosed spaces, and she wasn't going to survive a flood only to be killed by her own stove. The door she built from scrap plywood, reinforced with wooden strips nailed in a Z pattern for strength. She hung it on leather hinges cut from an old belt. Not elegant, but functional. The door swung inward to keep the wind from catching it, and she added a simple latch made from a bent nail that would keep it closed against anything short of a direct hit. Inside, she created zones. Sleeping area in the back corner, farthest from the door, piled with straw and covered with the wool blankets. Storage area along one wall, where she arranged the supplies in waterproof bins salvaged from the garage. Biscuit's area near the door, on a raised platform of pallets covered with his favorite blanket, the one that still smelled like her father's workshop, and a small open area in the center where she could sit, cook, ponder and move around without stepping on anything important. She tested the flotation before the water arrived. Using the garden hose, she flooded a small section of the yard and dragged a corner of the platform into the puddle. The tires lifted immediately, taking the weight of the wooden floor without any sign of strain. She climbed onto the platform and jumped up and down. It bobbed slightly but stayed level, the air in the tires compressing and expanding to absorb her movement. The water came faster than anyone expected. It sat on the concrete pad like something from a fever dream, a lumpy structure of black rubber and white snow, with a wooden door salvaged from the shed and a small window cut into the tarp on the side facing away from the wind. Inside, she had laid down thick layers of straw for insulation and warmth, arranged her sleeping bag and blankets in one corner, and created a raised platform of pallets where Biscuit could rest without touching the cold floor. She had supplies too: water bottles, canned food, a camping stove and fuel, flashlights and batteries, her father's old radio, a first aid kit, dog food, and the heavy wool blankets her grandmother had made before she passed. Enough to survive for a week if necessary. Hopefully, it wouldn't be necessary. Her mother found her at 7 in the morning, asleep on the concrete beside her creation, Biscuit curled against her side for warmth. Quote, 22. Maya opened her eyes to gray sky and her mother's face, a complicated expression caught between anger and amazement. What is this? It's a floating house for me and Biscuit. It'll rise with the water instead of getting flooded. I calculated the buoyancy. It can hold over a ton, and me and Biscuit and all our supplies weigh maybe 400 pounds. We'll be fine. Her mother walked slowly around the structure, touching the tire walls, peering through the window, testing the rope connections with her hands. You built this yourself? In one night? Marcus helped with the tires, but yeah, mostly myself. It's, Maya, it's incredible. But you can't actually, I can. I'm going to. You have to go to the shelter because they need you at the diner when this is over. Someone has to earn money, I know that. But I'm not leaving Biscuit to drown, and I'm not letting strangers take him to a kennel where he'll be terrified and alone. He's too old for that. He's too, Maya's voice cracked. Quote, 29. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something Maya didn't expect. She climbed through the doorway into the floating house and sat down on the straw-covered floor. Show me how it works, Maya showed her. The buoyancy calculations, the weight distribution, the insulation design, the supplies she had gathered. She showed her the rope system she had rigged to anchor the house to the old oak tree, long enough to allow the structure to rise with the water, strong enough to keep it from floating away downstream. If the water rises 6 feet, the house rises 6 feet. We stay dry, we stay warm, we wait it out. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, she reached out and pulled her daughter into a hug that lasted longer than any hug they had shared in months. Your father would be so proud of you, she whispered. He always said you had his brain. I think he was wrong. I think your brain is better. Does that mean I can stay? It means I'll be at the shelter praying every minute until this is over. And if anything goes wrong, you call 911 immediately. Promise me. I promise. The water came faster than anyone expected. By noon, it had reached the base of the concrete pad. By 2 o'clock, it was lapping at the tires of Maya's floating house. By 4 o'clock, the house was floating. Actually floating. Bobbing gently on the brown water that had swallowed the backyard and was working its way toward the street. Maya stood at the doorway with Biscuit beside her, watching the world she knew disappear beneath a sheet of muddy gray. Her swing set, submerged to the crossbar. Her mother's garden, invisible. The fence where she used to practice her pitching, just a line of posts sticking up from the water like the masts of sunken ships. The house rose with the flood, just as she had calculated. The tires provided more than enough buoyancy, the platform stayed level, and the anchor ropes played out smoothly as the water climbed higher and higher. By sunset, she was floating 12 feet above her backyard, tethered to an oak tree whose lower branches were completely underwater. The first night was the hardest. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. The water around the house began to freeze, forming sheets of ice that bumped and scraped against the tires with sounds that made Biscuit whimper. Maya lit the camping stove for heat, carefully, always carefully, watching for any sign of carbon monoxide buildup in the enclosed space, and huddled under blankets with her dog while the wind howled outside. The tire walls worked better than she had expected. The snow she had packed into them had hardened into solid insulation, and the straw between the tires trapped air in thousands of tiny pockets that resisted heat transfer. The temperature inside the floating house stayed above freezing, uncomfortable but survivable, while the wind chill outside plunged to 20 below zero. She talked to Biscuit through the long hours, the way she had talked to him every night since her father died. We're okay, boy. We're going to be okay. The house is floating, just like I said it would. The tires are holding. The ropes are holding. We just have to wait it out. Biscuit's tail thumped weakly against the straw. He was too old for adventures, too arthritic for cold nights on hard floors, too tired for anything but sleeping and eating and loving the girl who had refused to leave him behind. But he was alive. He was warm enough. And he wasn't alone. The second day brought visitors. But first there was the ice. Maya woke to find the floating house surrounded by a frozen plain. The floodwater had cooled overnight, and a skin of ice had formed across the surface. not thick enough to walk on, but thick enough to trap the house in place. She could hear it creaking and groaning as the water beneath continued to shift, pushing against the frozen layer, creating pressure that had to go somewhere. For a terrifying hour, she thought the ice would crush the tires, would squeeze her floating house until it popped like a balloon and dumped her and Biscuit into the freezing water below. But the tires held. They were designed to handle pressure, to support thousands of pounds of vehicle weight, to absorb impacts from potholes and curbs, to flex without breaking. The ice pushed against them, and the tires pushed back, deforming slightly but never failing. By mid-morning, the sun had softened the ice enough that it began to break apart, and Maya heard the most beautiful sound of her life, the gentle bump and scrape of ice chunks floating past her tire walls, moving downstream, leaving her house free to bob again on the open water. She cried then, for the first time since the flood began, not from fear or sadness, but from relief so intense it felt like pain. She had built this house in one night. She had bet everything on calculations she'd done in her head, on research she'd gathered from YouTube videos and survival forums, on principles she understood in theory but had never tested in practice. And it had worked. Against all odds, against everyone's expectations, against the voice in her own head that kept whispering that she was just a kid and kids couldn't do things like this. It had worked. Biscuit licked her tears and she laughed, a sound that startled them both in the quiet aftermath of the ice. "We did it, boy. We actually did it." Later that morning, Maya heard the boat engine before she saw it, a flat-bottomed rescue craft piloted by two National Guard soldiers in bright orange vests. They pulled alongside her floating house with expressions of pure astonishment. "Is someone in there?" Maya opened the door. "Me and my dog, we're fine." The soldiers looked at the structure, the tire walls, the snow insulation, the tarp roof weighted with ice, the rope system connecting it to the barely visible oak tree below. "You built this?" "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 12. The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them was trying very hard not to smile. "There's a shelter at the high school. We can evacuate you." "Does the shelter take dogs?" "No, ma'am, but there's a temporary kennel set up at—" "Then I'm staying here. I have food and water for a week. The house is stable. I'm fine." "Ma'am, miss, it's not safe to—" I calculated the buoyancy myself. 63 tires at 40 pounds of lift each gives me over 2,500 pounds of capacity. The platform weighs about 800 pounds, the walls and roof another 300, supplies maybe 200, me and Biscuit together maybe 130. I'm using less than 60% of my total buoyancy. I could stack a car on this thing and it would still float. The soldier who had been trying not to smile gave up and laughed. "I think she's got it figured out, Pete." "I think she does." Pete, the other soldier, shook his head slowly. "All right, miss. We'll log your location and check on you twice a day. You have a phone? Radio?" Maya showed him her father's emergency radio, fully charged, tuned to the rescue frequency. Quote, 50. Quote, 55. They motored away, still shaking their heads, and Maya watched them go with a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Pride. Not the small pride of getting an A on a test or winning an argument with her mother. Real pride, the kind that comes from doing something hard and doing it right. She had built a house, a floating house, and it worked. The flood crested on the fourth day, 18 feet above normal, 3 feet higher than anyone had predicted, high enough to submerge most of the houses on her street up to their second-floor windows. The mayor declared it the worst flood in Cedar Falls history. The news helicopters circled overhead, filming the devastation for viewers across the country. One of them spotted Maya's floating house. The footage went viral within hours. A tiny structure of tires and snow, bobbing on the floodwaters, with a young black girl standing in the doorway, waving at the camera, and a golden dog sitting beside her. The internet did what the internet does. It shared and commented and speculated, and eventually discovered the story behind the image. Quote, 56. The headline appeared on every news site in the country. Maya's phone, her mother had insisted she take it, had paid for a month of unlimited data specifically for this emergency, exploded with notifications. Interview requests, Messages of support, strangers offering money and resources, and help she didn't need because she had already helped herself. Her mother called crying. The water began receding on the sixth day. Maya watched the familiar landmarks of her backyard slowly emerge from the gray flood. First the top of the swing set, then the fence posts, then the garden beds her mother had built from scrap lumber and hope. By the seventh day, the floating house was resting on muddy ground again, its tires half buried in silt, its walls still intact, its roof still keeping out the rain that had replaced the snow. Biscuit was the first one off, hobbling down the plywood ramp Maya had built and sniffing the changed landscape with the curiosity of a much younger dog. His arthritis was worse after a week of cold and confinement, but he was alive. That was enough. Her mother arrived an hour later, driving a borrowed truck through streets that were still covered in mud and debris. She didn't say anything, just held Maya for a long time while Biscuit circled around them, tail wagging, barking at the helicopter that was still circling overhead. "I'm proud of you," her mother finally said. "I'm so proud of you, I don't even have words. I couldn't let him die. He's family. He is, and so are you. And I should never have asked you to leave him. You didn't ask. You just said the shelter didn't take dogs. And you heard that and built a house." Her mother laughed, a sound caught between tears and joy. "Your father always said you'd change the world someday. I think he was right." The floating house stood in Maya's backyard for 3 more months, a monument to what a 12-year-old could build when she refused to accept the impossible. Engineers from the university came to study it. News crews filmed it from every angle. A nonprofit that built disaster housing in developing countries asked for Maya's designs and permission to adapt them for flood-prone communities overseas. She gave them everything: the calculations, the diagrams, the lessons she had learned about weight distribution and insulation and anchoring. She didn't want money or credit. She just wanted other people to know what she had figured out, that you don't have to be rich or powerful or grown up to save someone you love. Sometimes you just need tires and rope and the refusal to give up. The school invited her to give a presentation about the floating house. She stood in front of 300 students, kids who had teased her for being quiet, for being a bookworm, for caring too much about a dog that wasn't even a cool breed, and explained the engineering principles that had saved Biscuit's life: buoyancy and displacement, thermal insulation and heat transfer, structural integrity and load distribution. For the first time in her life, nobody laughed. After the presentation, a boy named Tyler, who had once thrown her backpack into a trash can for no reason she could understand, came up to her with an expression she didn't recognize. Quote 67. He said, quote, 68. Quote 69. Maya admitted. Quote 70. Mr. Miller, the auto shop owner who had given her the tires, framed a photograph of the floating house and hung it in his waiting room. He told every customer the story of the girl who had saved her dog with garbage and guts. And by summer, Maya had become something she had never expected to be: a local legend. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt like a girl who had loved her dog enough to try something crazy. Maybe that was enough. Biscuit died peacefully the following autumn, curled on his bed by the heating vent, 13 years old and finally too tired to keep going. Maya buried him in the backyard, in the spot where the floating house had rested during the flood, the spot where they had survived together, girl and dog, while the world drowned around them. She planted a tree over his grave, an oak like the one that had anchored them through the storm. It's still growing.